Hi there, Elevated Planet community. This is John Drew here. Today I have the great privilege of interviewing Miguel Mendonca. Miguel has a background in forestry and horticulture, journalism, geography and history, social science and environment. He's worked internationally as a researcher, writer and campaigner on renewable energy before becoming an independent researcher. He then published books on a range of themes, including ETs, hybrids, disclosure, the social history of the UFO topic, wisdom, and the art of creativity. He now makes music full-time as Sokomiru and has just released his second album titled Into Galactic. Hi there, Elevated Planet community. This is John Drew here, and I'm here today privileged to be interviewing Miguel Mendonca. And as the Elevated Planet audience will be aware, I've done a bunch of Twiglet Zone, and I always offer up the opportunity for the audience to decide for themselves whether it's the truth or deluded nonsense, even though they know full well that it is my truth. But I understand also because I came from a left brain version of reality not that long ago. And a few years ago, I would have regarded it as deluded nonsense. So I fully respect people's right to look at it in that way. My progress has taken me through various pieces of research, various authors, and it's taken me quite recently to you, Miguel. I wonder if you could maybe start by telling me what your journey is through, which is taking you through, more into this extraterrestrial kind of area. How did that all come about?
In 60 seconds, I'm a lifer. I was given my first book on the topic when I was about 5 or 6 years old. So this is end of the 70s. And I had an encounter with this invisible presence. That's the only way I can say it. And I was 3 years of age at the time. And what I understood in that encounter with that presence was that there are clearly things in this world that we can perceive, but not with the physical senses. We know they're there, but we can't see them, hear them, smell them, taste them, nothing. But we know they're there, right? So clearly there are different levels, layers, aspects of reality that are able to interact, but they're not necessarily perceptible via human physical senses. And that set the course of my entire life. Having that experience and a couple of years later getting a book on UFOs and ETs, and then of course growing up with Star Wars and Star Trek and all that stuff. And I just had a lifelong feeling that I am not of this world. I cannot be the same thing as this, because this always seemed crazy to me. I always felt like a stranger in a strange land from a very early age. Why on earth would humans need weapons? Why would we need fences? Why would we need borders and boundaries? Why would we need to protect ourselves from one another? All these things are crazy to me. And I've had multiple experience with angels and ghosts. I've had near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, the sort of lucid dreaming stuff, all kinds of things that have given me the sense that human consciousness, particularly in the West, is very boxed in by religion and science as the two great explanatory mechanisms for us dealing with this, the fact that we're conscious and conscious of all of this stimuli, all of this stuff. And there's no two people who experience it the same way, right? I mean, for every conscious entity, there is a unique version of the universe. And the way that these interact is, on this planet at least, kind of interesting. I mean, through art, it is benign or benevolent, typically, maybe not exclusively, but typically. But the way that these differing universes interact outside of art and culture tends to be, well, it depends how you define culture, but we're pretty good at fear and paranoia and distrust and bigotry and injustice and inequality and feeling this permanent sense of threat from other people, and that we're in competition with them. And of course, the entire economy builds this in. All of our sport is all about wiring into us this idea of competition. We've got to beat the other guy, and look what people will do. And at work, I mean, I've done all kinds of different jobs in different places, worked with a wide variety of humanity. Even I was an environmentalist for a decade. I could not believe the levels of hypocrisy and backbiting. And it just feels like, I don't want to curse on this thing, but we are so screwed up as beings. I mean, I can't, I'm an immediate cleanse at the moment, because what I see in the media is just sends me just bananas.
Yes.
Trying to imagine why it is that a race of beings that is this old, it's been around this long, we're not kids anymore, even though we behave that way. We should have gone through that phase. We should have understood that competition is fine up to a point. It can definitely drive innovation. It can produce a lot of great stuff, but not if it is about inequality, right? If we were competing to be as benevolent as possible, that's a competition I can make sense of in a way, even though there's maybe an internal paradox. So yeah, I just, for my whole life, I have been studying humans, living among the humans, and feeling very, very, very different. And then, of course, during the books, I had a sighting, a craft encounter in 2009, which was intense and powerful. And like most people that have had UFO encounters, it's always fun to talk about because you're still trying to make sense of it. And excuse me, there is still that intensity to the memory that you're right back there. You know, I see this thing that looks like a satellite, except that it's just getting bigger and bigger and brighter and brighter. And then it shrinks back down, carries on, then it expands again, and then just like a bullet. And these things do change you. They do stimulate so much in you that is human, connected to imagination, to problem solving, threat resolution, all of that stuff, all of the different levels and layers and structures in the brain are at work trying to make sense of the strangeness we've encountered. After that, I sunk deeply and profoundly into the research. I mean, I was a pretty experienced researcher at that point. It was a lot difficult for me to acquire data, but it never answered the question. I mean, it just doesn't. I ended up connecting with Barbara Lamb, and because I'd seen some lectures that she gave on hybrids, and I was writing a novel about this stuff to try and piece it all together, figure out what would be the big picture into which all of these disparate but interconnected pieces would fit. What is that really? What is happening here? What is this interaction about? And why does it come in so many forms? And why does it stimulate us in so many different ways? And then in that process, talking to the people who self-identify as hybrids in that first book, I was just struck by how all of it felt so familiar and close to home, and in some cases near the knuckle, to the point where I really was asking myself serious questions about, could it be possible that I'm actually not from here as a soul, if you like? And piece by piece, things kind of came together, different means of gathering information on my nature, my journey. Some were in regression that were very spontaneous. And I've told those stories in most interviews, so people can find that elsewhere. And I think it's in Meet the Hybrids. I think that what Barbara and I did towards the end of it, it was so transformative and it opened up so much that I said to her, we'll each write half a chapter on the ways in which this has affected us. And so I was sort of pulling out some of my stories. I was doing my own job of piecing together my cosmic connections, cosmic history. And at this point, it has sort of switched form. The way that I've expressed it most recently is musically. And so I'm working full-time as a musician these days. I still do, bits of writing, articles and so forth, but not books. And the last album I did is called Into Galactic. It is the story of myself getting off planet finally and back out among the stars and just playing, just having fresh adventures among the stars in a way that, like, I really understand now what the hybrids and other folks talk about when they talk about how dense it is on this planet. I feel like bit by bit, I have come to terms with the information that I have acquired through my research about not just the topic in the larger sense, and we can talk about that because there's endless facets and endless years of what it all amounts to. But really, I feel like I've come to terms with my own place in it. And just working it out through the arts, I am finding is a much more sort of pure and direct means, even though it's abstract, even though it's not concrete in terms of finding language, working with sound, working with music. It is all about emotion. It is all about how does it feel to be here? How does it feel to think about these things? So I have a couple of projects in hand musically that allow me to process things in this way. And the other work that I'm doing is with artists of all kinds. I'm doing a series of collaborations where I take images of their work and I create music videos for my channel, the Sakamaru channel, and that's my artist name, so all my music is out there. So that's my general intro.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I've been listening to the music as well from your latest album, and I can understand your journey. And it's kind of like one of those things. I think it's like with a lot of music. It's kind of, some of the stuff is very, like whether it's rock or whatever. Then you got your Floyd, where you kind of just got to sit back and let it sweep over you. And this is more like let it sweep over you kind of music, right? And creative expression, all this kind of thing. I get it. And one of the things, it's interesting because Jolie and we do these CE5 meditations every week where we are kind of reaching out and asking for guidance. And one of the things we were told is that sound and music needed to be on Elevated Planet website. It needs to be there. He said, because they said, you're not elevating anything unless you have sound and music within that. So one of the things that I've actually linked to there, and I have to thank you for this, and to Philippe as well, who did the photography, is the crop circles thing, right? The crop circles with the music. And I've actually got that on the website now. So it links into the work you're doing, but that came through very clearly. So you talk about the density that's on the planet. Now, the problem for us is that, when we live our lives within the density, we don't even realize it's dense. And therefore, you've got no sense of perspective. But that's one of the things that, again, in my journey over these last few years, it's peeled away these layers. And all of a sudden, I feel lighter. I feel, endlessly happy. I feel joyous about life. I will selectively watch TV, but I'm very careful about what I ingest. I know the University of California in Irvine, they did a study recently, which actually scientifically proved that people who subject themselves to this stuff endlessly, it can affect them quite badly. And to me, one of the things that I've also learned is that it's kind of this deliberately distorted programming and conditioning that we get through life, that we now believe this is our reality. once you start to realize that you've been programmed and conditioned in a certain way, and you can start to see a different version of reality, then the fear drops away.
Where to start? I feel like people do have a tendency to swing too far the other way.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that there is a real imbalance in the way that people treat the media, that there can be a tendency to absolutism, to say all media is distorted. Like, I've met a lot of great journalists, solid people who are trying to do the right thing, that I do not believe are controlled in what they do. The media is diverse across the world. I mean, there's plenty of media that is state-owned. You know, we know that there were CIA operations where they had enormous influence in the media. That's public knowledge. The media is not all corrupt. And I mean, for myself, I don't watch the news, but it's simply because I can't handle it. I just have too much. I'm just too sensitive. That is the reality. Like you were saying, it does damage people. And if you are really empathic and you really want to heal, to help, and you feel so helpless, I mean, what can I do? I mean, I can send money to charities that do good work. I can send donations to Amnesty or to those who are going into war zones to help people. That's what I can do. But what I can't do is absorb it, because it's, for one, it's time. For two, it hurts. For three, it can be paralyzing. And number four, it can block you in a lot of other ways. It can start to drain the color out of life. You, it seems to me, are somebody who may have gone through something similar and has come to a place where you've found a means to survive, to thrive, to be happy, and to contribute to more joy, more happiness for people, and to expand people. And that's the opposite of the black holes that people get sucked into, because it absorbs all light. That's what happens in a black hole, as we understand it, at least. So to me, the most important thing I can do is to spend time in light and joy and beauty through art. That is where I find levity, humanity, humility. It's where you can set aside ego, you know, your own bullshit and that of other people. And it is more expanding and it's more connecting. I think if I was to give any human being of any age 2 pieces of advice for any kind of happiness, it would be to spend time in nature, even if it's looking out the window and taking in something of the natural world, and to be creative, even if it's doodling during a phone call. Anything that you can do in these regards, I think, can help you to be more balanced. And spending all your time reposting memes on Facebook is just not going to get the job done.
No, and it's interesting, like the in terms of getting in touch with nature, that's something that keeps coming through to me as well. But also was the importance of actually connecting with nature, literally feet on the ground, touching nature, hug a tree. It is a deeper connection. I mean, looking out the window, if that's what you got, then that's what you got, right? And let's face it, you and I both live in England. The weather doesn't always play ball to make you want to go skipping across the field and hug a tree. So you've got to have a balance to everything. But it was interesting because the idea is the earth energy coming through you. And the Gaia, Mother Earth, the living, breathing planet, is there providing you with kind of energy that helps you to be balanced. That's part of the things that I'd never realized. And you mentioned much earlier about competition. I lived and worked in America for over a decade. And one of the things that amazed me, well, didn't amaze me, but it's one of the things I learned about the culture there. So super competitive. I always used to think the UK and Europe had that, and we do. We definitely do. It's the westernized kind of version of reality. But in America, it's kind of like everybody is like, life is a competition. This is kind of part of what you got to. You're either going to win or you're going to lose. There's an awful lot of losers over there who have very little, but there's also a lot of winners. It just seems so distorted. And this materialism kind of thing, I think there's always a balance, right? There's a spiritual part of life, there's a material part of life, and there is a balance to achieve between the two. Because if you go to one extreme, if you're so steeped in spirituality that you forget about the fact is we're here in this physical incarnation for a reason. And part of that is to go through this material aspect of life, as well as, you know, learning who we really are, right? That we're part of something far bigger. We are part of something. We're here to experience this and to kind of work our way through. And also, this is one of the things that always amazed me. I got this Soul's Gift book going back about 4 years ago. And I love that, the life planning that goes on before we come here, before we are born into these bodies, and we have the instant amnesia from which we have to then uncover everything as we go through life. The fact is, we have a plan before we come here. Now, that's something that always intrigued me. And again, it's kind of one of these things that sounds very fantastical, but I'm convinced that part of my life path was to do what I'm doing now. It took me 58 years before I even started to uncover this, almost 58 years. I mean, this is crazy. So that's why I respect people's right to look at this as deluded nonsense, because I lived in that world for so many decades. It took me an awful long time to get where I'm getting now, but it's a magnificent thing. What would your thoughts be around that kind of thing? I mean, you're here for a reason, right? You doubtless, your past lives, your entities or whatever have been out in the stars. And I know that you've had information and been given information specifically around that as well. How do you feel about your incarnation here on the planet and your reason for being here?
Well, sometimes it feels like a crazy error or a bet or something. You know, the image that I have is that I was at some bar on some planet. I mean, picture the cantina scene in Star Wars, right? I think we all kind of go there. And I imagine having a drink with some being from somewhere, and we're swapping just crazy stories of places we've been. And he just, you know, at one point he just leans back and he said, "Buddy, I can top anything. I can top any story. If you want nuts, if you want polarity, if you want intense, there's only one place to go. And we'll meet back here in 100 years and you tell me how that went down." And I'm like, I'm game. I'm there. Don't tell me. It's like movies. I'm like, don't tell me anything about it. Give me a title and I'll sit down and I'll watch it. And I feel like that's what's going on. That I had no idea what I was in for.
No.
But I do certainly believe that that's how it works, that there is a level of intention in our incarnations, that we do have some sovereignty, some agency, some awareness of at least the experience we're looking for. I don't know that I really buy the whole karmic thing. There's definitely a variety of interpretations of what karma is, but I do not feel trapped here, put it that way. I feel like I can come and go as I please. I can do what I like because I self-identify as a wanderer. Through certain experiences, that seems to me solid, that is my nature. Every part of it makes sense. Like people have said, oh, I think you're a hybrid. I don't self-identify that way. People have thrown a lot of things at me because everyone comes through their own filter, the filter of their own experience, outlook, their nomenclature, whatever it is. But I don't pin myself to any place or race or any of that. I just feel like I go where my curiosity takes me. And this is a pretty curious place for sure. So to put in maybe a wider context my previous statements about how it does my head in, the way that people treat information and effectively the way they treat reality here. In the wider context, if we all choose, then we're all choosing to come here and kind of be crazy together and to try and puzzle things out, to make it in a place like this. You know, there's that line in New York, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
That suddenly comes to mind. And actually, from the scene in As Good as It Gets, where Jack Nicholson is putting the dog down the garbage chute and saying that to the dog. Yeah, I mean, it's a madhouse. It's crazy. But
Yes.
I mean, you'll find things here that will, I mean, the kindness in people every day. At some point, I'll get misty or teary by just some act of kindness I witnessed somewhere in the world. And I just think that the best of humanity is an absolutely awe-inspiring thing. The level of courage, bravery, the will that people have to help others, to put their own lives in danger relentlessly, in whatever means that is, whatever form that takes, the humor that people have. I mean, that is how I survive, art and humor. I make sure to watch at least an hour of comedy every day before bed.
Yeah.
My favorite people that I've met are the ones that make me laugh the most, I think, in general. And there's nothing I like better than getting taken to that place of just losing it at whatever it is. And the comedians that I really love, I mean, a lot of them are very political, and they were going places that were opening people's eyes. I mean, Bill Hicks was huge. I mean, he was really blowing up at the time I was kind of coming of age. So that was one means to sort of open the minds. And then, of course, I discovered Monty Python when I was like 13, something like that. And myself and one other kid in school had seen it. And the next morning we came in and we're like, oh my God, did you see that show last night? Monty Python's Flying Circus. It was so mind-blowing because these people were messing with reality in the most incredible way and finding the absurdities of life. And it didn't even need to be on the nose satirizing. It was just, they were showing you how crazy the things are that we take for granted. And there was something of the naughty schoolboy in them. My friends and I, we basically spread that among our little group, who were very, very creative. I mean, my friends were some of the most talented people I've ever met to this day. Humor is about caricaturing life. There are things that we inflate and things that we reduce and that we change relationships and perspectives. So I feel like humans are just an innately creative species. And I have heard it said by researchers and experiencers that beings coming here in raw form, if you like, wherever they are from, whatever form they're in, they often comment about how creative humans are and that they appreciate our humor. And that certain people have told me, the beings themselves have a really great sense of humor.
I've heard that.
So it feels like one of those universals. And I feel like, to be honest, it is one of the best tools in our toolkit for coping.
Yeah, I would agree. And the other thing I would say as well, that probably one of the reasons why the other beings probably admire our sense of humor is that I think we have a wider sense of a range of emotions, from the depth of the density through to the light and everything in between. And yeah, when you use that in the right way, create humor, you can create all sorts of things. And I do think that, to me, this is a very important part of life, is laughter. The 3 points that we have that Elevated Planet stands for is love, laughter, and lifestyle. It's those 3 things. That's like our little holy trinity. And the point you make about, being touched every day by an act of kindness somewhere in the world where people have been so selfless. And I love that. And again, these are the kind of stories we're filtering in now because, they're just beautiful to read. You just look at this stuff and it gets you here. You think, wow. Once you start to get away from the density of the stuff that's going on elsewhere on the planet, and you realize these acts of kindness are going on millions of times every single day. I'm encouraged by the fact, say, for instance, on LinkedIn, there are certain channels there that just purely are there to put things that make you happy. This is the sort of stuff that elevates you. You look at it, you feel better in yourself for having experienced that energy. And the more of that stuff we share, then the more elevated we become. It makes us feel kinder. It makes us feel better, because every act of kindness begets an act of kindness, right? It's the ripple. it's the ripple effect of everything going out, builds out, builds out, builds out. Of course, the same thing works with fear as well, right? And that's what we're going to be the antidote for, is just kind of be the ripple master for the positive as opposed to the ripple master for the negative. Everything's a balance, everything is equilibrium, and we want to be a part of that light equilibrium. And I'm so grateful to you for the stuff that you've taught me through the gift of the work that you've put out. And I'm loving the music, and I'd love to be able to feature your music within Elevated Planet as well, to kind of encourage people to research it, to kind of experience it for themselves as well. Now, one of the things that I've been banging a drum about for a long time now is planetary shift. What is your interpretation of what is going on at a planetary level?
Well, I don't know. Again, I don't have the data, not in any first-hand capacity. I mean, I hear many, many, many different interpretations, and during the Meet the Hybrids research, the ascension idea was very hip. So it was ascension, 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 ascension. Everything was frequency and vibration and shifts and dimensions and densities and new earths and all of this stuff. And of course, I don't think anyone anywhere has any kind of proof. I think it's an idea people like, but I've got a problem with people speaking it as fact when, even if some beings have shown up in their room or taken them on board a craft that says, yeah, we're going through the shift at the moment, and your planet is shifting into a higher vibrational frequency, which is the fifth dimension, and those that are ready will shift. Those who are, light enough. I mean, that is the making of a cult right there. I mean, I did a lot of research on cults, read all the top books on it, and that is just kind of cult 101. That is create a heavenly idea, speak it as absolute truth, and say that only the chosen ones will go. And I know people who've got religion. We all know people who caught religion, and they become absolutists. That biblical absolutists, that they say every word of the Bible is absolutely true because they want to get into heaven and they want to feel protected. I do believe a lot of it is still fear-based. This place is creeping me out. I want to go to heaven, and heaven is the fifth dimension. And also the fear of death, the fear of pain, the fear of a painful death. All of that thing of losing somebody close to you, and everyone who's lost someone close to them has gone through this, I think. Of course, you ask yourselves, where are they now? I've had a medium come to my home and tell me that dead people that have been close to me are in contact with me. And they give me messages. They say, oh, he's saying this, he's saying this, he's saying this, he's laughing like hell and saying this. I take it with a pinch of salt. I don't know. Some of it was wild in that it makes no sense. Like, if he had described that person in any other way, I could have written it off. But he described the guy I knew, and he never heard of that person, right? So who knows? There are so many different ways of coming at the idea of the end of life, the afterlife, and people say that, well, the soul is so huge that an aspect of that person that you can relate to still exists, and they are on some plane. But the soul is so massive that part of that person, part of the soul, is reincarnating. So what is soul energy? Is it just the everything of everything? Is it just the fact that all of existence is energetic, that all existence is conscious, that all of us are fragments of source? In the beginning was source. Everything proceeds from source, because source wished to become more. It wished to evolve, and the only way to evolve was to split itself into an infinitude of fragments, and each of those fragments can take a form. It is a fragment of consciousness, essentially, in at least one reading of it, and that can then take form by choice, like me and like you, and here we are. So this is essentially source learning about itself through Socratic dialogue. And there's an audience of people who are listening to this, and they may be taken on their own little journeys. Some people might appreciate it, but everyone is reacting to it. Everybody is being changed by this experience. And every single thing that happens is connected to every other thing that happens. There's no gaps between things. If everything is one big field of energy that resolves itself into different things depending on your sensory equipment and your perceptual apparatus, then there is only one thing that exists, and that's everything. And so what does this mean for the average human? It means that you pays your money, you takes your choice. There's just a frankly endless variety of things to choose from in terms of what you might believe about reality. Now, some are based on experience personally, others are based on the experience and perspectives of others. Personally, for myself, I try to at least recognize that everything I experience is just my experience. Everybody has their own, and they're all interacting. And even if you set aside absolutely all of the cosmic stuff, and when we die, we just rot in the ground, and that's all there is, and all this other stuff is waffle, it's just delusion, it's still a crazy experience to have, to be conscious. And anyone who's ever done psychedelics, I think, has had the experience of meeting themselves, of suddenly seeing their hands. I mean, this thing that people see in movies and cartoons, whatever, yes, your hand's going to leave some phenomenal trails, but I just remember seeing a hand and then it moving, and it was absolutely separate to me, and I just thought, my God, this is the most beautiful, incredible thing I've ever seen. And then I started looking down and following it, and then realizing it was attached to me. I was like, oh my God, this is mine. Holy shit. And then I looked across, I was like, oh my God, there's two of them, right? And this is like a rebirth as a human being, as a conscious entity that is also physical. It was like a moment of actual rebirth. And stuff like that, at least in one reading of it, is going to give you a sort of fresh appreciation of the complexity of life, that we are conscious energy on the one hand, and we have this dense physical matter that is still conscious energy.
Yes.
And it's all us, and here we are, and it's pretty awesome. And there's all these other people doing their thing and interacting. You know, I just enjoy being able to get real with people and take it to that level of setting aside all the human programming. I like to hear from people about, I'm a conscious entity, so my consciousness is connecting with yours through this stuff, through a voice box, a tongue, etc., lungs, language. We're able to find some common language, and we're able to communicate in this time and space, in this moment. And let's just celebrate that. Let's think about that for even 10 seconds, about the miracle of that. Because all the other stuff, you know, I feel like we take too much for granted. I feel like we get hung up on a lot of stuff that is nowhere near as miraculous as the fact that we are conscious, and conscious of being conscious, and able to consciously choose what we do and where we put our time and how we interact and all of those things. And so to me, all of this discussion, all of this cosmic awesomeness, it still resolves down to, what am I as a conscious entity going to do now? What am I going to take responsibility for myself, for other people, and for the world in which we live?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting way of looking at this, and you know, the connections that have happened to make this happen, the billions to one. That this is
and the fact that
now.
the
right?
fact that whatever you believe about the start of our universe, the birth of the universe, whatever, however that came into being, if it was some type of Big Bang inflationary thing, you go right back to that first moment, to the singularity, and you and I were in that singularity together.
Mm.
And all of the things that had to happen, all the ways in which our ancestors survived, all of those things that we had to do to have the experiences that we had, to even buy the kit that we're talking on, all of those things, it is infinitesimally minute, the chances that this would happen. And yet at the same time, it was perhaps inevitable, depending on what one believes about determinism. All of this may have been written.
And one of the things I've heard a lot, the next 3 years are going to be the vital ones. One of the things I kind of look for is consistency of information, like in Meet the Hybrids, for instance. There's an amazing degree of consistency across different people in different parts of the world who didn't know each other. And I like that, because that helps me to buy into the concept of what is going on. And it really works really well with the Dolores Cannon work, with Stephen Greer and the rest of them. It's kind of nice with that. One of the things I've heard is that these next 3 years are going to be the tumultuous years. This is where change is happening. And I don't know what that looks like, and I don't pretend to know what that looks like. But I do get the fact, and I'm kind of putting this out there because I also know that if in 2 to 3 years' time nothing's happened, then people are going to say, yeah, well, that was deluded nonsense, wasn't it? And I'll say, yeah, it was. I really fell for that one, didn't I? Now, I personally believe something is occurring, something is happening that is changing our environment and changing our world. What is going to be is going to be. I don't worry about it. I just kind of do what I feel is needed to be done right now, and allow people to make their own minds up about whether it's for them or whether it's not for them. But I love this idea of community consciousness. I love the idea of us coming together with an elevated frame of mind, with that, going to those, because I always ask the question, like, you've got the dense emotions, which are going to be fear, stress, anger, greed, control, and on, violence, judgment. Or you've got love, laughter, fun, joy, all these kind of like that upper level there, which, that makes life worth living. Now, who would not choose if you had the choice? Now, people don't feel they have the choice. They feel they have to be in fear, stress, and all the rest of it because of where they are in their life. But, the idea of coming together with community consciousness to kind of understand there is a bigger universe out there than just us. It's not just humans on Earth all battling out between each other and having division energy and all the rest of it. There's actually a much better way of looking at life, which brings happiness to you personally. But at the same time, as you come together and share that energy, then that in turn kind of accelerates it. And it's a multiple effect, not just 1 + 1. This is, a multiple effect. And I kind of believe that is the way that things can happen, and is the way that I would like it to happen.
Well, I am not an optimist when it comes to the human future. That's just based on observation and experience, and my degree was geography and history, and so in geography we're looking at all kinds of crises, particularly environmental, as I swung that way and I took all those courses. There's no one keeping score on me trying to make people happy, so I think for the human future I just don't think there is one. And I believe that simply because nobody else believes it. I feel like there's such a minority of people that get how late in the day we really are. Mm-hmm. The rate of climate change now is just endlessly accelerating, it seems. And there are so many effects that is having that are constantly multiplying one another, these, feedback loops. And people don't want to hear about it, because they essentially are told that we're doing this, everything's getting better, everyone's earning more money, and technology is improving, and we're living longer, blah, blah, blah. But I think this is happening in terms of the health of the biosphere, the loss of biodiversity, the loss of, I mean, the Amazon, I think it was last year, flipped from being a net carbon sink to a net carbon emitter.
Wow.
Because they've cut down so much of it. As a carbon sink, something for absorbing CO2, it is no longer functioning. It is now emitting more. And that's just annihilation right there. That's it. That's game over. And if you look at, I mean, all the other things that are happening in, you know, melting permafrost, the methane that's been released thereby, and, you know, from the ocean, the methane clathrates and all of that business, and God knows how much of this stuff we don't even know. But there are so many ways in which climate forcing gases are being released, not just by humans, but through human activity. They're now being released through carbon sinks, and the ocean itself is losing its carbon absorbing capacity. So we are in a death spiral, and there's nothing is going to change that. That's my belief.
Yes.
Based on everything that I understand about the way that climate and biosphere function, and the human mind, that we are experts, cosmic experts at denial. We all know that. Denial about things in ourselves, our own flaws, our own failings, our blind spots. Denial about maybe the health of a relationship. Denial about our need for material things. Whatever it is, I think we're pretty deluded in a great many ways. And there's no one with an off button. That's the thing. There's no one anywhere that is able to push a button that says stop. We are, you know, my work was renewable energy policy. So I was, you know, as it were, on the front line doing that work with colleagues around the world, trying to speak truth to power. It shouldn't have been a case that ever needed making.
No.
Obviously, if we understood at the end of the 19th century that increased use of fossil fuels, like more CO2 and climate forcing gases, would exacerbate the natural greenhouse effect, trapping more heat in the system, building up more and more and more and more heat in the system, it's going to screw that system. If it is a system that's based on balance, you can't emit more than can be emitted.
Equilibrium. There was a book I recently read called Less is More, but it's talking about all the things you're talking about there, about the fact that we are kind of on a death spiral, and you know, is there still time to do anything? Well, and more importantly, is the will there to actually reverse it?
No to both.
That is the key question, right? Because is it feasible? Possibly, if we dropped everything today and looked at life completely different. But is the will there to do that? Is there a leadership level, you know, top down? You know, that doesn't exist. Now, that to me, this is why I kind of like cling to this idea, and I don't know, you know, I hand on heart is what I believe, but it's, you know, this idea of changes are going to happen. Dimensional shifts could well happen, because that's the only way the planet can be shaped. Because the physical that we exist here on the third dimension now has a sell-by date, right? It's now that sell-by date is approaching because of the disharmony caused on the planet by mankind over these last, well, not even centuries, over this last century in particular, ever since nuclear testing and all this kind of, and everything else that has exacerbated this. But, you know, it's the greed, it's the capitalism, it's the need for materialism, you know, for materialism. It's just kind of, everything is now out of balance. Everything is supposed to be a balance, but the balance is the pendulum has swung so far against, it's way over here now. So the only way it can self-correct is to come back all the way over here, which means cataclysms, right? This means like there has to be a bit like with the, you know, Atlantis, for those who kind of like buy into that idea, that you there's an equal and opposite force. The more it gets out of line, the more that you come over here, and we don't know what that looks like, but, you know, let's say, you know, the climate change side of things comes back, and we'll get volcanic activity, we'll get earthquakes, we'll get tsunamis, we'll get tidal waves, we'll get extreme weather. You know, I feel that that is kind of part of the changes that are coming, and it's not going to be fun, but at the end of the day, that has got to come back over here to try and rebalance it. And, you know, I don't know whether there's a survivor out there, but
it depends. It does depend. I do think that, you know, particularly with the super volcanoes, I mean, they are when, not if. And the amount of particulates, the amount of stuff that gets fired into the atmosphere, that is not only going to exacerbate the greenhouse effect itself, but it's going to block out a lot of the light that crops need to survive. I mean, there's a reason dinosaurs died out. So I feel eventually we're going to take a lot of species with us, but we're going to go. And, you know, whether people buy into the idea that the nice people, the people who have done their, you know, work with meditation crystals and whatnot, are going to transmute into a fifth dimensional body and be in this new earth with no right-wing scumbags, and it's all going to be nice, and it's not going to be about power anymore. It's going to be about balance. So that means equality and justice. That may mean the balance of masculine and feminine, that you need the strengths of both to survive, the best of both to survive. So I certainly, my most hopeful vision for this world is one with little or no humans on it, simply because the rest of existence has done nothing to deserve what's been done to it. I just think it's all far too little too late. I mean, if you look at the fact that there's now microplastics in human bloodstreams, you know, we've really screwed the pooch with discovering oil and fossil fuels. You know, what we've done with plastics, the amount of pollution that we are incessantly pumping. I mean, for the kind of demand that is placed on our energy system by our materialism, there's no way that we can stay in balance. I don't believe there's no way that we just don't have the time to learn. And when you talk about will, the fact is we seem to create these pyramids of power where the greediest, most selfish people tread on anyone and anything to get where they want to go, which is to the top. And there's no such thing as enough for these guys. That is the impression I've been given over the course of a half century on this planet, that greed has no limits for these people. And now, you know, these billionaires are going off planet and they want to mine asteroids. People want to mine the moon. What is it that allows them to generate such, I mean, historically unprecedented levels of inequalities? And even when people don't want something, like all over the world, millions and millions and millions of people marched against the Iraq war, but guess what? The people that were going to benefit the most from it, particularly, you know, the Chinese of this world, they were like, this is happening. This is happening, and it's of no interest what other people want. And they were going to lie boldly about weapons of mass destruction. No plan. It was go in, get rid of Saddam, start getting our hands on the oil, on infrastructure, start getting contracts to Halliburton and, you know, all our friends. And I mean, they've actually had to change laws to prevent stuff like that happening because it was so shameless. And this is not just the US and America, and it's not just today. It seems to be more or less all over the place, more or less all the time. It just seems to be, at the end of the day, an entity expressing its nature, which is that we build these structures of power, we indulge it, and we do very little to shift it. Even when we try our hardest, it seems like the dark side seems to have a grip on this place. And if that's the case, if we are not run by the benevolent, if we are not run by the wisest, and I did a whole book on wisdom, and what I understood from that is that wisdom is ultimately benevolent. It's not intelligence, it's not smarts, because you can be a smart serial killer. So it's ultimately about benevolence. And if the wisest among us are not making the decisions based on the things that we want, the things that may be in our best interest, that lead to more flourishing of the human spirit, that lead to more interaction with nature and the identification of ourselves as nature, if these are not the people that are making decisions, if these are not the processes by which we make decisions, then of course we're going to end up where we are, and of course we're going to end up where we're going. And like I say, I think the best that we can say about that is that we are, it seems, not merely flesh and blood, that we are spirit too, that we are consciousness, that we can choose where we incarnate, and that the hell that we're heading for is not the be all and end all. It's not the end for any of us. It's just a experience on this planet at this time. It just happens to be one that profoundly affects all of us in positive ways occasionally and in negative ways, but it is the experience. And I feel that anything that we can do that can really positively, with wisdom and benevolence, help us to cope better, whether that's interacting with each other in positive ways or finding time to spend creatively, to practice self-care, to practice connection with other things, with other beings, with other aspects of the self, whether it's here or beyond. These are all the things that make this experience doable for me. Fascinating.
And on those that very note as well, the recent Stephen Greer YouTube, which came out, and I think I'm going to put a link onto that for Elevated Planet. And I'd encourage you to look at to any of the communities, look at that, because a lot of the things that Miguel, you're talking about there, he goes into a great deal of depth on that and actually provides evidence and detail and documents that actually back up how it happens, why it's happened, and why it's still happening. And also why, to a large extent, prime ministers and presidents are pretty much just puppets to what's going on anyway. You know, they're not truly in charge of what's really happening. There's a much, much bigger agenda sitting behind them over which they have no control. So fascinating stuff. And the final thing I just wanted to mention, because one of the things we've been talking about here, I have a quote here from the Nostradamus quote from the channels that Dolores Cannon did. It says, the changes made to the earth through the abuse of mankind, the disharmony caused by wars, makes future calamity to be seemingly inevitable. There will be physical changes. The best one could do is to continue to work for the light and put out as much positive energy as you can to try to lessen the effects as much as possible.
My personal view is that no matter what your outlook on life, I think the best that we can do is to be kinder to ourselves, to each other, and the world in which we live, in whatever ways that is. I just think if we, instead of spending our time getting angrier and angrier at the news, at social media, in conversations with people that just drip negativity and nothing but, I feel like if we can just take that time, if we can figure out what's going to make me happy, what's fun, fun, man, it's all right, it's okay. You know, our entire way of life is about work, 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 money, 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 bills, bills, bills. It's bananas. And then you've got to manage all that stuff once you've bought it, and oh my God, and maintain it or sell it or get rid of it. Crazy. So, 100%. You know, I just think taking time to get with your inner child. I mean, the Dalai Lama's meditation, or at least one of them, is about himself as a 7-year-old boy, as I understand it, and connecting with that kid in you through art, through being in nature, through swimming in the sea, whatever it is that you can do to remember what it was like to be a more clear, purified, almost simple version of yourself. You know, that thing when you're unburdened with stuff and the world of ideas. Like, if you can do things that are physical and visceral and positively emotional, you can cry in a positive way. You can remember somebody that you very much loved, and you can weep, but you can weep with a kind of happiness.
Right.
There are definitely ways, in other words, to cope with this experience to make it a better one. And mine right now is making music. On the day that the Ukraine war broke out, I've never been so affected by any conflict. Never. It was a reaction that I didn't see coming. And I think a lot of people have been kind of caught on the hop in that way. And I was trying to make music that day. I was in the middle of, I was just taking like a break, and I think I looked at the news and it said, yeah, it's starting. And it just messed with me to the point where I thought, well, I just can't create. I can't make happy music, and that's all I really want to do. And then I thought, wait, this is actually an opportunity to transmute my feelings into something. So given that the album I was working on was about being a different aspect version of myself off in the future, looking back on this time, I created a piece called The Distant Memory of War, in which this version of me is looking back at this moment and this conflict and how I feel now. But from that distance, it's all very attenuated. So it has this kind of sparse, ambient feel to it. And yet I know what it's about, and I know it was capturing the feelings that I had, and I felt purified on the other side of it. When I'd finished, it had just passed through me and allowed me, at least for that day, to cope. And that was, I think, my first real experience of what I would call art, which is that transmuting, that willful focus transmuting of experience into another form. And it was at that moment that I feel like I really understood the true power of art for the self, at least. I mean, and strangely, when I put the album out, I shared it with friends, and the reaction I got, people kept coming back to me and saying, yeah, I really like The Distant Memory of War. And I was like, that's crazy. I mean, all the rest of the album is so put together. It's so, I mean, a lot of those tracks are 30 hours of tinkering and work and and minute adjustments. But the distant memory of war happens in like maybe an hour, something like that. That I just found the sounds and I found the feel and I found the tempo. I found it all really quickly. So I can only take from that that something in that reached them.
Yes.
And maybe they really understood what I was saying and it touched something in them. It reflected something in them.
I wonder actually also because like with the creative process, it's like when you look at music, some of the finest music of the last few decades, and the bands will say, oh yeah, we toiled over this album, this track which has been there forever and everybody loves, we made it in about an hour. It's kind of like you're almost channeling this is what's supposed to go out, right? Dark Side of the Moon is something like that. They were brought together to create this beautiful piece of music, and everything like happens. So I think that the creative process is not necessarily, it's not a toil thing. It's kind of when it just happens, that's real. That's kind of connection to a higher self. It's connection to something that's allowing you to be a channel for something that you're creating.
That's the thing. That's the miracle. And it happens in so many ways. I mean, even when I was doing my books, I remember working on We Are the Disclosure, and 4 different people channeled in that, and I don't think any of them were aware. And I'll describe what happened. And I knew, I had that feeling, the pit of my stomach, that these people are all channeling. And when more and more and more were doing it, so what happened is they were chatting in the way that I am. It was a certain pitch, a certain frequency, a certain level, if you like. And then I'd ask them a certain thing, and they'd be chatting, and then there would be a pause, and the energy would go boom, and they would speak really slowly, really clearly, in perfect sentences, and give me a perfect paragraph. And then there would be a pause, and then it was like they came back into the room and blah, 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 blah. But those paragraphs were exquisite.
Yes.
And 4 different people, and I didn't tell them, but what was crazy is that the more it went on, the more I kept having those experiences, I started to open up to what that energy was as well, and have that feeling. Like I do Reiki, and anyone doing Reiki or anything like it is familiar with the feeling of energy running through you, that something's coming through. And I believe that every artist knows it. And it's not just artists. There are any amount of examples historically from artists, from musicians, from mathematicians, from chemists, from biologists, physicists, and so on and so on and so on, engineers and architects that dream these things, that suddenly get visions of things.
Yes.
And they go, oh, that's DNA. That's the DNA molecule, for example. And these people have said, I mean, I'm sure, I wish I had the quote from someone like Mozart, Beethoven. They said, I did not create this.
Yeah.
I was just a tool for this, you know.
A vessel.
A vessel, you know. And that is to me one of the most fun experiences I think that you can have, which is why one of the reasons I think that art is so beneficial is that it, in the right space, it turns each of us into a channel for what it could be anything. I mean, my good friend Faye Vale has been doing channeled artwork for years. We did a book together called E.T. as Artist. Faye Vale, check it out. You know, you can find her stuff on her website, social media. It's on Amazon, and all of that stuff. I've seen her do it. That is the most incredible channeling that I've ever seen. Basically, she goes into like a light trance, and her hand just starts. It's like automatic drawing, and I was at her home one day and I was doing stuff on the computer, and I suddenly realized, because I was so focused on what I was doing, that it took me a moment to realize that her voice, she sounded almost like she was under hypnosis. I've done regression. Obviously, we've all seen people being regressed, and we're familiar with the way that people speak. They're speaking like they're asleep in many cases. And I've listened back to my own regressions, and I've heard myself in regression because I wasn't switched off. I was still, you know, conscious of the experience, if you like. And so I turned to see what was going on. And sure enough, somehow she had a pad on her lap and her hand just moving, and she was able to talk about what was happening while it was happening, but as an observer. Yeah. Saying, you know, you can see, you know, my hand just has a life of its own, and I don't know what it's doing. I have no idea. And sometimes she doesn't even know what the image is until she turns it 90 degrees or 180. And she goes, oh my God, and the thing is literally created upside down. It's wild. Yeah. I absolutely believe that she is genuine and authentic. She's one of those people. She's from Leicester, and she just tells it like it is. There's no filigree, there's no nothing. It's just here it is. And there's messages that come through, there's light language. Sometimes she has a back and forth with the being. She doesn't know who it is. She might ask for a name and write down some crazy bit of light language, or it could be a sort of English, an anglicized version of what that is, or how it sounds. And then sometimes there's just quotes that appear out of nowhere, and they are absolutely drenched in a kind of wisdom that I think most people can relate to. So to see somebody channeling in that way is this sort of reminder that I think all of us, when we slip into the flow state, that is the place in which we can connect, and we can reconnect, we can channel. And I feel like in general, it is one of the most healthy things that there is. There was the guy who coined the term, I cannot pronounce his name, an Eastern European academic, was basically doing a study of what makes a life well lived. So he was interviewing people who, if I remember correctly, there's a great TED talk on it, were really high achievers. I mean, these are people at the tops of their fields, and he just kept hearing the same thing from all these people, that the best moments in the work are when they are sort of detached from the ordinary level of consciousness, and they slip into an altered state, in a sense. Their brain waves are functioning differently. They're in a different kind of brain state, and things come through them that are not necessarily just passed via the left brain. Stuff shows up, and there's also a real joy in it, that they are totally, I mean, you see little kids, you know, how happy they are when they get the crayons out, or they get Lego out, or whatever creative thing it is, and they're completely focused in and joyful because of it, and they come out of it and they are calmer. You know, they've expressed something, they've been somewhere, and you get almost like a mini vacation. It's different to meditation, but I feel these are both routes to major mental health improvements on a momentary basis, a daily basis, and as part of a healthy lifestyle on a lifetime basis.
That makes total sense to me. You know, even like when I'm doing writing's always been my thing. And sometimes it just like happens. And it's usually when I have to stop and think about it and work at it tirelessly, that's just me. That's left brain working. But sometimes in a few instances, there it is. And it's just come from nowhere. But it has come from somewhere, but it's not necessarily the left brain. This is more connection somewhere else. And that was something, that's usually the quality piece of work. Anyway, I value your thoughts. I value your work. You know, what you're doing through this kind of stuff, it's a gift to the world, right? This is something that people can pick up on and learn, and you're sharing other people's work as well. And you've been connected with so many people and highlighting their work. And that's why I've got things like this as well, which is Juju's book. And that's kind of all a direct part of the ripple effect again, working, positive ripple effect. Let's understand why we're here. Let's understand what this is really all about, rather than the small version that we are fed at the outset, that you have to kind of do something to consciously break out of that into a broader reality. It's all part of the journey. Truly appreciate your time, Miguel. And thank you to the Elevated Planet community for joining us here. So I truly appreciate your time.